Please welcome to the stage Harry Halpin and Chelsea Manning.
Hey, how's it going? How's everybody doing?
On Austin!
Yeah, I know, right? All right, so I'm Chelsea Manning, and this is...
I'm Harry Halpin. I have the honor of being Chelsea's employer right now as CEO of Nim Technologies. Collaborator, yes. But I think, let's get to the point. We're doing some really amazing new technology. We will tell you about all that technology and how it impacts the future internet. But I think everyone is really here everyone wants to hear your story, Chelsea.
Right, yeah, they do. So this isn't my first time here at South by. So this is, this is my second time at South by Southwest, and I think like my 9th time in Austin the last few years. So I'm definitely very familiar with the city, and I'm definitely enjoying myself this week staying here. But generally, I think a lot of people know my history, and obviously I wrote a book very recently, and that just came out in October of this year. But one of the things that I'm really trying to focus on now for 2023 is the more forward-thinking things, the projects that, even though I have this history of being in the military and working in the intelligence and data science field, and really being sort of there in a very complicated time with the war in Iraq, and with revealing a lot to the world. I've been very focused personally in the last 5 or 6 years with the things that are going on today and how they connect to my own history and my own past and my own sort of area of expertise and the things that I care about. And I've known Harry for many years and worked with Harry over the last 5 or 6 years on a couple of different projects. And this is primarily with the forward-thinking focus that I've had. And I think that my experiences, both being a trans person, a young trans person, and facing like houselessness in Chicago in my youth after being kicked out of my house, as being somebody who is very into technology, as a video gamer, and as somebody who likes to express themselves, through social media, and and sort of figure out my own identity, but also, doing really hard work and and grappling with the real ethical implications of surveillance technology, of what data science can do whenever you're in an environment where your objective is to track and capture and potentially even kill people without a whole lot of recourse, or without a lot of oversight onto how this practice works. And so taking this background and taking a lot of the experiences and difficult things, including being imprisoned and facing the consequences of revealing things to the world, I think has allows me to have the insight to think about how do we move forward from that. Like I said, in grappling with the last decade and a half of my life, I've been very focused on surviving today, because I came out of prison in 2017 at a time of rising tension. It was a few it wasn't 10 weeks I was out of prison from the commutation by President Obama that Charlottesville happened, and many of my friends were caught up in the protests between neo-Nazis and anti-fascist protesters, or counter-protesters and protesters, so I came into the world this very fraught time of increased tension in the United States and increased policing and everything else. And then again in 2020, with the pandemic happening and the presidential election of 2020, yeah, so it's just been. It has been this constant struggle of trying to get through the current things, like what is happening now in 2023, and what is happening as we're going into a tense not just a tense political environment, but now a tense economic environment where people are going to be increasingly struggling with inflation, the supply chain effects that are still lingering from the post-pandemic environment, a war. An invasion, the prospects of war in all kinds of places, but also with the Russian invasion into Ukraine and how that's affecting, the supply chain and the markets and people. And just as a human being, like I feel like one of the main factors that I usually have in my lectures at universities is talking about the human element and how. Yes, I'm a technologist, and yes, I do a lot of that involves a lot of going over code and going through very complicated math problems and having lengthy conversations about technical things, which we will get into.
Yeah, and I was shocked that Chelsea was actually doing cryptography in prison. You might want to tell about that.
Yeah, so because I've been very forward thinking. I've been thinking about all of the things that we've been grappling with over the last few years. I'm constantly thinking about what's going to be happening in the future. But one of the things that brought me and Harry together to work on various projects is I was very concerned about privacy as the surveillance methods post-2010, post-2013 have solidified and it's become cheaper and easier to do large-scale surveillance. To where it's not just large government agencies like the British GCHQ or the American National Security Agency. Now corporations have become able to surveil people and to collect large amounts of information on people quite cheaply. And even the methods that we use, like virtual private networks and Tor, have can be entangled by increasingly sophisticated global surveillance actors, which is euphemism for internet service providers who are collaborating with corporations and the government. I was thinking about this problem a lot, and so I identified that we're going to have to rethink the infrastructure of the internet and how we communicate every day, because it's not working. Something is not working. Where we are turning over large amounts of information by default, right? Every interaction we have is down. Like TikTok it's down to the microsecond, right? They're not even measuring your. It's not even. They can learn everything. They can learn so much about you, and they can categorize so many interests about you with TikTok, and increasingly Meta is replicating this technology where it's your swipes. It's how fast it takes for you to swipe on a screen. It's down to the microsecond, and so you can't there's no way to hide that. There's no way to. There's no accept button for swipe speed. And learning an enormous amount of information about people that are coming from sort of the equivalent of micro expressions and sort of involuntary movements and involuntary eye movements. So I think that down to the lowest level possible, we need to rethink how we do privacy on the internet. And so I was working then with a friend of mine that I know that works at Brave. We laid out this proposal to essentially do a privacy mixed net, which would include some features that had been talked about since the 90s, but actually make it practical and scalable and be able to be implemented in a real world environment to provide privacy and anonymity for people at the cost of having to do a lot of computation. And so I came up with a proposal that was very similar to a proposal that came before Harry Halpin.
We were shocked that while, but also pleasantly surprised that while in jail, Chelsea had essentially come up with a proposal to defeat surveillance on the internet and preserve our privacy, and including you were thinking...
It's a collaborative effort.
Collaborative effort, but you were also, you and your friends who were literally working with you in jail were thinking even further in the future,
right.
Thinking about post-quantum,
2020s.
which you might want to mention, the post-quantum thinking, about the future of computing, and also the hardware components. Maybe you want to mention both of these.
So, obviously, I come from a very heavy background in software and in data science and data collection, but a component of that has increasingly meant, especially whenever it comes to machine learning, because that's also a focus of sort of data science, is training machine learning algorithms and neural networks to be able to sort through and filter information and identify patterns. And we did this in the military. This was a very important aspect of the job that I had as an analyst, was essentially doing predictive analysis on charts, maps, and graphs, but it would essentially be the equivalent of a meteorology report for a war zone, right? What's the percentage chance of IED attacks in this area? You need to have an understanding of how to speed up computation in order to do this to scale. And a part of that is understanding that some of these math problems require specialized hardware. I mean, we've seen this with the rise of graphical processing units, with the rise of tensor processing units, which are more focused on sort of specific to AI problems. I know that in the cryptocurrency space and the crypto mining space, it's ASICs that that essentially do endless Sudoku puzzles and producing an enormous amount of heat and essentially burning down forests and worth of heat to accomplish the goal of generating a number that can then be traded for goods and services among a small number of people. But all of these technologies have been converging in this direction towards the confluence of data collection versus privacy. And I even go a bit further than that and say that it's not even because of the amount of data that we generate every day and the amount of the gigantic trail of metadata that we have because of the flaw of our internet, which and our online spaces and how we do it, which is that privacy is not built in by default. We essentially leave this gigantic snail trail everywhere we go of metadata that just you can't really do anything about. Even if you don't even have a phone or a computer, like you're having enormous amounts of data collected about you, and a lot can be learned about you in this way. Humans are shockingly predictable. Like, we think of ourselves as like being these rational actors who make decisions and who have all of these different things. But from a purely data perspective, it's shocking just how close, like 95% close, these algorithms can be at predicting various aspects of how we're going to behave and what our risk profiles are and how willing we are to throw out money at 2 a.m. on some random product, right? If you've ever sort of had a conversation with someone and you talk about a thing or you think about a thing and then you look at and then you open up your phone, you haven't searched for it at all, and you get an ad for it for this. It feels very suspicious. It's not actually that you're being surveilled right in that moment. It's not like there's a microphone that's like, oh yeah, you were just having a conversation. No, it's actually like figured out that this is what your brain is probably going to be thinking about. So it's almost predicting like what you're thinking as opposed to actually surveilling. And that's how important metadata is. And that's why we need to rethink the infrastructure that we have, because I don't think it's fair that the average person who doesn't have 20 years of experience in digital security, because I struggle with digital security every day. I mean, I use TikTok, I use Instagram, like I still use these things, and I'm a security consultant, and I'm an expert in this field, and yet, I struggle with this, and we can't expect the average person who doesn't have this technical background to be an expert at securing your information and protecting your information. And obviously it's become a business model where you pay somebody else to do it, but like you're depending on somebody else now, and you don't even know like which feature set is important or what your threat model is or anything like that. And so I don't think it's fair that we put this on the user. I think that the infrastructure, the internet itself, needs to be completely rethought.
Yeah, I could just go into a little bit about our thinking on this.
Yeah, so this is the actual project itself.
Yeah, so when I did my first pitch, it was in New York City at the Google headquarters of all places, and Chelsea showed up and encouraged me, and that meant a lot because I think I just want to say something. There are people that are famous for being rich, like Elon Musk, but they could lose all their money. I'm sure there's people here that are losing their money right now in various bank collapses that will happen on Monday morning. And there are people that are famous for being beautiful, but physical beauty is fleeting. But there are also people that are famous for doing the right thing. And while fame is a hard burden, I think we can all agree that Chelsea did indeed do the right thing. And then I think the question is, what can we do next? What can we do to prevent people from having their behavior predicted? And that's dangerous because we are dealing with very sophisticated adversaries, and it's not just behavioral prediction that is the problem. It's really behavioral control, mind control. I don't want to live in a society. I don't want to live in a future where my thoughts are constantly monitored. That would destroy creativity and dissent. And as we all know from the relatively up and down state of US politics right now, that creativity and dissent are very valuable for the future. And we need this ability to have free thinking preserved for future generations. But, as Chelsea mentioned, the computational power of our adversaries is rapidly increasing. And it's not, at this point, just the NSA. It could be Google. It could be Meta. It could be China. It could be Russia. It could be any, there are more entities than ever that can now effectively have what I would consider a God's eye view of the internet. They can look down upon the internet and see every packet that's moving through the internet itself. And every time you use the internet, you are communicating packets over TCP/IP or UDP. And those packets, the timing and the volume and who you're talking to and when, that's all revealed. That's all in public. The internet was designed in a trusted academic environment. And that leaves, because of that legacy, whenever you use the internet, your metadata leaves a unique fingerprint. And that fingerprint can then be used to trace you. And so we were, in the late 70s, early 80s, a cryptographer called David Chaum invented a technique on paper, and he's implemented a perfectly good version. It's wonderful, called Elixir, that he thinks could defeat this kind of surveillance. And it seems impossible But indeed, it's true that the simplest way you would defeat someone who's watching your every packets is to mix them up, to shuffle them like a deck of cards. So this is kind of what happens. I don't, how many people here use a VPN? Your VPN? Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's great.
Technically educated.
Very good crowd.
How many people here have used Tor? Ah, really making me happy.
Yeah.
So I'll just describe really quickly what's going on here. What happens with a VPN is that you are hiding your data from whatever website or service you're visiting, but you're only really hiding the IP address. You can see that the packets, as they come out, have a kind of shape. And that shape is just forwarded by the VPN. It's preserved. And the problem with that entire methodology is that all of the trust is in your VPN, be it ExpressVPN or Molvad VPN or NordVPN, whatever VPN you use. You've just tried to change it so not only does Google know everything about you or your ISP, but the VPN knows everything about you. So you have this kind of trust. And anyone who's watching the inputs of the VPN and the outputs can tell exactly what you're doing. Now Tor, which was originally a project coming from kind of US Navy and MIT hackers, decentralizes VPNs. And that defeats the ability of the VPN itself to hand all your data over. So as you can see from the diagram, the data comes in, and it goes not to a single VPN, but to a sort of decentralized VPN, and has like 3 hops through the network. And that's a huge advance, and I use Tor every day, and I think it's about, it's a wonderful technology for web browsing, and I believe everyone should use it every day. However, it doesn't actually disturb that fingerprint because the packets are still coming in, first out. So you can see that that fingerprint is still there. So what a mixnet does is that the mixnet brings in the packets, and it tries to not only make them all the same size, which Tor also does, but it shuffles them through 3 hops. So the packets are no longer coming in, first out. They're coming in and out in a random order, and they're randomized 3 times, so you can't simply take down a single node in the system and determine what's been mixed up in it. And this level of per packet mixing really gives a kind of privacy against NSA or Google level surveillance, or China or Russia. We think everyone should be using it. That really wasn't available before. Now it does come, as Chelsea mentioned, at the cost of more computation, but that computation can be outsourced to a decentralized network of servers, kind of using what I would consider a Web3 paradigm. And that's currently what we have working. We actually have built that code. We think it's the first general purpose TCP/IP UDP mixnet out there that can take generic internet traffic, like from Telegram or even Firefox, so it's a bit slow, or cryptocurrency or whatever, and mix it up. And and it's really close to the same conception that Chelsea had in prison, and I've been honored to work with her on it. And Chelsea produced the first security review of it and found all sorts of flaws which require much more deeper work in terms of secure hardware, which we'll talk about in a bit. But we're also, we're not, the thing with privacy is that it's not just a feature. People want a magical privacy box, right? They want to have the ability to effectively kind of just turn a button on, just be instantly private. That's what a VPN does. But the fact of the matter is, even if you're using a VPN and you're going to Google, or you're going to Facebook, or you're going to who knows what, TikTok, they can still, even if your network level, your packets are protected, the application itself can still access your data. And you have no control over that. You don't know, whenever you sign in with Facebook or you sign in with Google, you have no idea what data is being shared about you and what third-party data harvesters it could be going to. So what we built here is a new technology, which of course, because it's South by Southwest, we're launching here, called ZK NIMS. That stands for Zero Knowledge. And what a zero knowledge proof is a way to prove something without leaking any further data about that fact than the proof itself, one bit. And so, for example, I live in Europe, and our company's Swiss, and but when you get to the United States, even in South by Southwest, people ask for your ID at a bar. And you basically have to prove you're over 21 so you can drink. It's bizarre Puritan behavior, but it is the United States. There's nothing we can do about it. At least it's not prohibition. And so how this technology works is, I think, the intuition, just like the intuition of a mixnet. The intuition of a mixnet is that my packets are like a deck of cards, and I'm shuffling those deck of cards, and the cards are coming out in a random order. The intuition behind a ZK NIM, a zero knowledge NIM, is that I have an identity, which in cypherpunk history is called a NIM. But rather than show someone my entire identity card, so they get all the information about me, what you can do is you can selectively disclose what you want to prove. You can prove you're just over 21 and prove nothing else about yourself. You can prove, for example, that you've been vaccinated and nothing else about yourself. You could prove that you're an American and nothing else about yourself, which could be very useful particularly for companies that are trying to exclude Americans now due to the ongoing crisis. So how it works, I'll just describe really quickly. I would like to create a name for myself. That's what NIM means in Greek. I talk to an issuer. That issuer could be me, myself. I can just issue things about myself, and you can trust me. It could be a government. It could be any third party. And then they basically send that data back with a signature, a special kind of signature that they have made. That proves, or you've made if you've done it yourself, that says, I believe the statement about this person is true, such as they're over 21, because I'm the government, I have access to their ID. But then when you want, then you collect all of the things you want the characteristics or facts about yourself that you may want to prove. And this is where the magic happens, powered by cryptography, is that you can, what you call re-randomize that. You can encrypt it, you can re-randomize it so that it's no longer linkable to your original discussion with your issuers. So you take your driver's license and then you hide it, and you get a new kind of license back that just proves you're over 21. And then when you want to let's say the bar is terrible, the Dungeons and Dragons theme isn't really working for you. So you leave that bar, you go to another bar, and you can flip it, and it's an entirely unconnected credential that can also prove you're over 21, but the Dungeons and Dragons people can't possibly tell which bar you went to next, and you could just show it to them, so forth and so on. So this is, we think, pretty revolutionary technology. It's out on our test net, and just to reiterate really quickly what it is, it's cryptographic, doesn't depend on laws or governments or irritating boxes where you have to click consent or not. It's cryptographic, it's decentralized, there's no single party in control. It's spread out among many validators, many authorities, and the user is ultimately in control. And they just have to have an agreement enough among themselves, that's called threshold issuance. And then when the user uses it, it's unlinkable to any of their previous usages of the credential. And they can selectively disclose what they want people to know about them. And we think that's a really big deal. And we hope, but that's just the beginning, because even though we're very proud of the mixnet, we're very proud of our new tech stack, ZK NIMS, the real problem with privacy is that privacy is always a holistic aspect of a system. You could be
Jenga.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like Jenga. If the whole thing will fall down if one block is missing. And what Chelsea has identified is she basically has identified that this problem goes all the way down to the foundations of the hardware we're using on the internet. And at first, when Chelsea told us this, we were like, well, that's a really
expensive.
And hard problem to solve. And it seemed impossible.
Right.
But then Chelsea produced a plan, and then we have discussed that plan with other experts, and they agree with you, which is amazing. So why don't you tell people about your secure hardware plan?
Well, I mean, I want to just walk this back just a little bit, which is, you know, I was involved in the internet in an era in which I think that some people might call it the latter half of the cypherpunk era, where cryptography was viewed as this liberatory force, where it became like this idea that you could be anonymous, you could have secure conversations, that you could interact with people in this online space. Became this this almost liberatory sort of thing, like this thing that you could do to in which you would be more free. And what has happened, I think, in the last decade or so, and I've certainly watched this happen, is that cryptography, shortened to crypto, has been sort of co-opted by a number of different actors who, it's become more associated with cryptocurrency. And sort of the token asset, sort of bubble that occurred. It's actually occurred 3 times now, where it goes up and they find another thing. It's first it's Bitcoin, then it's NFTs, it's Ethereum, and so you sort of go through these rise and fall cycles, but it sort of sucked the. It sort of sucked the interest out of it, the liberatoriness. It's been just sort of a place where it's gotten a bad connotation from people. I think cryptography, which is the full word, is what I'm really truly interested in, and I think that's. I want to just try to get people to recognize that there is more to cryptography than there is to what happened over the last few years before this crash, right? Where you had all these people who were basically running all these different scams and schemes, and now it's sort of fallen apart, and multiple exchanges have fallen, and now banks
are falling.
Now banks are falling. So. But I have always viewed technology as potentially, even with vast surveillance and and with now a craze over being able to use AI, in all these different ways, to be a liberatory force. And I think that that's still possible, but you really have to think like you were saying, holistically, because it's every aspect, every single aspect. If you leave one aspect out, then somebody owns you. Your stack is owned. And we are currently owned, all of us. There's nothing we can do about that. I mean, we can sort of gloss over it a little bit, but right now, true privacy is very different. True privacy in the sense, you are more private having a conversation in the 1990s than you are today. Whether or not you own or use a phone or not. And that's just the reality of the situation. And I feel like one of the problems with sort of the crypto era from 2017 to last year is that it really didn't connect with people. There was nothing that they really couldn't. They were all trying to sell you something, and it just seemed like a used car sort of thing. And this is cryptography and privacy. Can be something that the average person can, or even the vulnerable people who aren't necessarily technologists, or who aren't seeking to be somebody who's super into technology, can take advantage of. And that's sort of one of the problems that we've sort of had in developing NIM, is that this is not a technology that is ready for, I'll freely admit it, this is one of the problems with NIM is that, yes, we've been able to produce a proof of concept of a mixnet, which has been a general purpose mixnet, is now proven as possible. It exists today. People can use Telegram over it. Packets are being sent across the network. I mean, there's been a couple outages here and there, but the testnet is working. The data is secure across the network. Now we have to make it accessible. And one of the problems with accessibility is that sending a dial-up speed Telegram message is not gonna fly with most people. And also it's complicated. It is a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to accomplish, to set up. It's a difficult thing to accomplish. And you know, we need to have more privacy tools like Signal. Signal's we're very inspired by sort of the Signal model of having an app that just works, right? And that's what we need. We need to develop the hardware on the network itself that can do these zero knowledge proof calculations fast enough, cheap enough for, you know, from a production perspective and from a running perspective, like in terms of like you don't want to be like needing an entire, you know, dam in Kazakhstan to be able to just, you know, work on 100 users, like, packets running across the network. Like it has to be cheap, and the only way that you can do that is by having specialized hardware on the network, which is a difficult thing to accomplish, you know. And so like we sort of identified these problems and we've identified these limitations, and I think that this.
Well, why don't you tell people about RISC-V? You're the one that brought up to me. If you...
Oh yeah. So one of the areas of interest that I have in the hardware space is, obviously the Intel and the AMD and the NVIDIA people. Are not necessarily happy about me talking about this, but RISC-V is an architecture that is free. It is open source. It is available to hardware developers. And more importantly, you know that this architecture, if implemented correctly, where the vulnerabilities can be. So like a security-focused hardware designer. Won't be surprised all of a sudden because Intel, I don't know if most people know this, but x86, the AMD and the Intel-based processors all have built-in problems into the vast majority of their hardware that we sort of had to be glossed over once or twice in the last 5 or 6 years after they were discovered, because they were built into the hardware. Like a lithography machine, whenever they produce these chips with a laser, put a vulnerability into the hardware, which you can't patch. You can't, you have to actually replace the chip. You have to replace a physical chip, and it's very expensive to do on scale to replace all of these different chips, especially whenever you're running them on servers or on edge computing applications or anything like that at an enterprise scale. And it's definitely the case with mobile technology or laptops. And as individual users, it can be very expensive and very time consuming.
So how does RISC-V address this problem?
Well, I mean, RISC-V gives at least a palette or a set of tools in which you are able to design and develop hardware that is less likely to have these sort of security vulnerabilities, especially if you design the hardware in a semi open source manner. I mean, obviously, from a security perspective, you don't. You get the opportunity to keep some of this stuff proprietary, and obviously, security companies would want to keep some of those aspects proprietary, but you would want the general actual processing unit itself you would want to know that there's no vulnerabilities baked into the hardware itself. And I think that it makes it less likely. It's also cheaper because you don't have to pay like ARM. You don't have to pay like a company to design to develop this technology. So I have a lot of I've been very excited for like 8 years about RISC-V as a technology since I first read about it in 2015, even though the standard was developed in 2010 or 2011 at Berkeley. I think that there's a lot of opportunities for secure hardware to be developed over the next 5-10 years, and especially it allows for more distributedness across, because lithography machines like the ones that TSMC are using for for say the iPhone chips or the Macintosh M1 and M2 chips. There's a lithography limitation with that. They've sort of reached the process node where it's just like you you can only fit so many transistors on a chip. So SoC development has shifted to application-based SoC components and modules on a chip. And I might be losing a more general audience here, but the point is that RISC-V gives you the ability to make these more secure modules and have it on the end user's device, which can remove the middle person. And so one of these concepts that can be developed is something that Apple has already implemented, which is a secure enclave. But we don't know much about that secure enclave because it's proprietary information developed by Apple. And I think that as much as excited as one can be about secure enclaves, I think we would want to make sure that secure enclaves are available to everyone and are secure by everyone. Because who knows if there's some secret subpoena, which has happened before, or some secret warrant where Apple is forced to do something, and who knows? Maybe they'll cave and they won't tell anybody that they have this vulnerability in there. So the open sourceness can prevent a secure enclave, which a secure enclave at the physical from the physical layer, the hardware layer, allows your data to be protected. But like I was saying, once it's baked into the hardware, you have to get it right then and there. You can't, potentially you can have some firmware patches, but you have to get it right at the design level. And whenever the internet and whenever the first CPU processors, your Intel i3 386s were developed, they weren't developed with security in mind. In fact, there was practically a ban on cryptography, up until the mid-90s.
Just like the internet itself,
right?
And just as open source.
So it's not the infrastructure of the entirety of the way we use things is just patched over. Like security, like HTTPS is a patch of HTTP, right? So everything's been patched and patched and patched. And so that's what I mean by the infrastructure. If you could go back to 1970 and be forward thinking, if we had the computational capability to rethink how we're going to secure data from the very get-go, this is how we would do it. That's what I think we need to be able to do moving through the next century, right? Because we're reaching a limitation here where there's not going to be a whole lot of innovation in the technology space. We've really it's not that we've peaked or that we've reached the end of the road or anything like that. It's just that we've sort of reached a point where a Word document isn't much different than a Google document, and that's kind of going to be something similar 20 years from now. The iterative development periods are going to start to get longer and longer, and as we do that, we need to make sure that we get privacy right and build it in from at the lowest level possible, and like that Jenga tower, make sure that we don't have a Jenga tower, that it is a solid iron rod going up. Yeah. Although iron corrodes, so I guess you would want to in this analogy, I could get really into chemistry.
So basically, you're applying open source methodology. You're applying open source methodology to the hardware itself, which is perhaps the only way to really secure and make private the actual foundations of the internet.
Yeah, and yes, we've been talking about this, but we've been trying to think of different ways in which we can do this, but we've more or less identified this as an issue. There isn't, while NIM in particular is I think an opportunity. I think that we're more widely given an opportunity to rethink how we're going to view many of these approaches, because this space is this space and these stages have been kind of dominated by a particular type of character for the last 3 or 4 years. So.
Yeah, I would say that we can do some questions here in a second, but ultimately we're entering an era of widespread artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is based on data collection, which is a form of surveillance. Ultimately, the internet,
which we will happily turn over.
Which we will, we are happily.
Unless it's prevented by some means.
But I think there's a note of hope, because we have the tools. You have a plan even of how to secure and make the internet private, and we just need
An
more.
idea, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good idea, I think. And we just need more people to take the side, like any great struggle, it's a struggle of power versus people. Will we have some control over our lives in this internet-driven era? And we have some of the tools, and we can have more, but we need more people to sort of join us, test these tools out, help in whatever way you can. And I think it's really amazing that this vision has been formulated partially while you were in jail.
Right. Well, I mean, also, you weren't really able to talk about these things because for a few years, for the last few years, because it feels like that spark of inspiration that we had in the 90s and in the 2000s sort of faded in the 2010s because of all because Silicon Valley became so powerful and it became so influential. And as that is waning, and while it is a difficult time for people in the technology space at this time, it is also an opportunity for us to kind of get back to our roots and focus our priorities again on protecting the user and on protecting vulnerable people like activists, organizers, journalists, people like me, like in the various positions that I have been in throughout my life, to prevent these things. So these are preventative measures and important ones. And I just want to go on a quick aside here about, I keep getting this feeling deep inside of me every time I'm on a Zoom call or I'm scrolling down TikTok, or when I'm sucked onto my phone at 1 a.m., like going through looking for YouTube videos or some kind of meaning. I have never felt more alienated in my entire life than the last couple of years. And I've been to prison, right? So, like, what is happening with us and the society that the digital society the digitally focused society that we've been kind of forced into now, because one of the things that happened is that 3 times as many people in online and wide broadband access countries now are kind of forced online by their school, by their work, by being more remote. Now digital things are happening between you and your government more frequently, where you're submitting your IRS forms more directly, which obviously Intuit is not going to be happy with having TurboTax have a competitor from the government. As this has happened, I feel like it's becoming a health problem. I feel like privacy is actually a health problem, because as I've been ceding more and more of my own privacy and my own feeling of alienation and disconnection, I've been progressively getting, like, my health has been deteriorating at these different points in time, and I have to set down my phone, turn it off for 2 or 3 days, and run or something.
You've left prison and you've entered a new kind of internet prison.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think, we do have.
Let's get some questions.
And we do hope that you join us, and we have some. So just as you may know, Chelsea is doing a book signing tomorrow.
Oh yeah, I wrote a book. I did that.
It's a very good book. I hope everyone can grab her afterwards. The book signing, but we do want to get to some questions. So let's take a look at some of the questions from the internet. So the first one from Cassandra is, what are your thoughts on the government wanting to ban the use of TikTok and mandating the removal of it from federal devices?
I'm not surprised by that. I don't think that is a new policy per se. I think that banning it on federally mandated devices. I think all social media platforms, and I think that's just an extension of existing bans or existing skepticism. I don't think that necessarily says anything about individual, I don't think that necessarily says anything about your some 12-year-old in Florida having their TikTok banned. This is specific to federal devices. That doesn't surprise me. I think we've seen these kinds of bans going back to the late 2000s.
Okay, it's obviously going to be a kind of new era.
Yeah, it becomes
warfare.
It becomes a talking point in news, but this doesn't necessarily say anything about TikTok that they're not saying, that they haven't said about Meta products like Facebook and Instagram in the past either. Because trust me, the DoD or the Department of Energy doesn't want Instagram on their phones either.
And here, the next question is, are there any practical steps to protect yourself, besides the work we're doing with NIM, from the government tracking and weaponizing things like abortion?
Absolutely, I think about this a lot, and then that goes to like what I was saying about like, when you're thinking about activists on the ground who are in, like obviously with the Dobbs ruling last year and the repeal of Roe v. Wade, you had a number of people who became who essentially were healthcare providers who all of a sudden were activated, right? As like how am I going to go about treating people? How am I going to go about doing the right thing from a health perspective that might go against some legal structure, like a state actor. And so you're essentially taking normal people who are not security experts and you're putting them into a position of where they don't have 20 years of security expertise. Like how are they supposed to go up against a state actor, right? What are their risk models? What are the threat? If your threat model changes from being a law-abiding citizen to being like, I don't know what I am or where I fit overnight because of a legal change, which can happen to any group of people, but it mostly happens with minority groups in particular. You're essentially being forced as an individual, as a non-technical individual, to protect yourself against a very sophisticated state actor.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. No one who was thinking of using their right to have an abortion thought of themselves as a criminal. And people say, well, why would we need all this privacy technology? Why would we need a trusted internet?
I mean, this happened in Poland as well.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, one day you wake up and your behavior is criminal. Your online behavior can be weaponized against you. So it's not just building for the problems we have, but we're trying to build technology to confront the future problems of a world that's facing ecological, social, and perhaps on Monday economic crisis.
Yeah.
So let's look at the person that asked that question rather cleverly remained anonymous. But let's go to Victor's question. How do we ensure privacy but also solve issues of crimes on 4chan and other platforms where people abuse anonymity online and offline?
Oh yes,
it's a very good question.
You can use cryptography to commit crimes. Yes, we've heard this many times. The problem from my perspective is actually a more meta one, which is who gets to determine what is and is not criminal, because they usually use very obvious things, right, as examples, like, oh well, child pornography, which is this awful thing, right, But whenever certain people say like, oh well, this means that we have to ban encryption, well, it's really because the legal system is used primarily to target in these sets of circumstances people who are political dissidents, people who are minority groups, people who are organizing in some means, like in a protest or something like that. That's where we've seen these kinds of arguments and technologies come up the most, right? And it's very difficult to grapple with this question, because it's more of a legal question than a technical question. Because if you have a society in which you're not addressing these issues or in the right manner, then you're essentially because if you insert a backdoor for one particular problem, the problem is that you're essentially making everyone vulnerable. It's that Jenga tower, right? Because this comes up most frequently we need to ban encryption debate, right? Which is essentially like you pull the Jenga pieces out from the bottom. Like, of course it's going to all come tumbling down, and that's the point.
And we're seeing this now with the UK online safety bill, which is threatening to undermine encryption.
It would gut encryption. It wouldn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and companies like
there is no backdoor to encryption. Yeah. You just tear down the wall. That's it. There's no more curtain.
You either protect everyone or you protect nobody, and it seems like a lot of our lawmakers don't understand it.
Oh, they understand it.
Well, or perhaps they pretend not to. But what I would, what I would say is that, I think it's just to reinforce Chelsea's points. What causes this abusive and toxic behavior online is an abusive and toxic culture outside of digital space. Stamping out of digital space will not necessarily make it better in the rest of our lives. So, police shouldn't be lazy and look for a back door. They should put more feet on the ground. Activists shouldn't just say, okay, we need a backdoor everyone's encryption to solve this problem. Activists should be focused on solving the problem holistically, organizing and fighting for new kinds of social norms and values that prevent these problems to begin with. And I think, ultimately, I think often comes down to sort of Pascal's wager, which is, did you believe that humanity can use the internet for good, primarily, or for some form of ill, such as, whatever abuse is currently happening. And I still believe, and perhaps call me optimistic, that the internet still can ultimately be, as Chelsea put it, a liberatory force, that the power of ordinary people to do good in the world, as Chelsea has demonstrated in her life, still outweighs the risk and the harm that can be caused by social dysfunction. So we have a technical question: what the possible attack surfaces where adversaries can exploit the ZK Nim process? That's from Owen. I'll take that because that ZK Nim is our baby. Don't worry. Hardware is your thing. I do the zero knowledge proofs.
I mean, I do zero knowledge proofs as well, but I just know they're very hard.
They're very hard. Yeah. So what we're doing is we are focused. Like any system, we're focused on providing the best possible privacy and security based on some assumptions. And some of those assumptions, which is one of the reasons the system is decentralized, is not every component in the system is corrupt. So if the government that issues you the identity is corrupt, there's nothing we can do about that. If somehow your hardware is attacked, as Chelsea's pointed out, there's nothing we can do about that either. But
if your phone gets owned.
Your phone gets owned, exactly. But what we do, similar to Bitcoin, honestly, is we spread it out. So we say, well, as long as we can decentralize the process so that there's multiple issuers, there's multiple kinds of credentials, and everything is ultimately user-controlled, then we kind of decentralize the threat service. So we're saying, well, maybe it's likely that there will be malicious actors, but the malicious actors won't be in the majority of the system, just as we, at least personally, believe that the majority of humans that use the internet are not malicious. And you can argue with that, but that's the current kind of threat vectors and assumptions. And I think we're running out of time. But
we have more questions. Is there another question?
Yeah, I think you had one.
So you're talking about dealing with this holistically, right? And like doing it with the hardware. I think a lot about mining and indigenous rights, and I think a lot about the actual material that we use to create this technology. And so, could you speak to the material conditions that we must transform in order to source that matter for producing that new technology? In a way that is in solidarity with indigenous people.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's basically the question is going towards the blood silicon question, which is, like whenever you're sourcing this material or the energy in the computational process, where is that coming from, and how is that being used? And I certainly think about this in the climate context a lot. Like one of my main focuses is on making cheap computations, and I mean cheap not necessarily from a monetary perspective, but from an energy use perspective. So that way, you're essentially, you can do this using 3 watts on a solar panel. But then you get into the question of, well, where does the material for the solar panel come from? Where does the silicon come from? And things like that. And so yeah, like I think a lot about this. We obviously aren't doing hardware development at this moment, but I certainly think Harry, I don't want to speak over you on this, but I think that that's one of the advantages to sort of open sourcing the process, and why I think a lot about RISC-V and how that can be very advantageous for the global south and towards decentralization of the supply chain, because you have right now the vast majority of chips are made in Taiwan by a company called TSMC, and they're made from these are made from minerals that are produced in countries that are either going through through very complex conflicts that are usually colonial or imperialist in nature, and they're being all this extraction is happening, and then it's being shipped out using all of these different parts and put into phones that have come from all of these different parts that are done for cheap labor and things like that. I certainly want to think a lot about how we restructure our hardware supply chains to have it be more sustainable, have it be more healthy, and have it be more thoughtful as we move into the future. Because if we continue to do what we're doing right now, we're not going to be able to sustain the society, and it's already starting to come apart. We saw this in 2020, where this globalized supply chain coming from all these different directions just started to deteriorate, and it caused the price of everything to go up. So it's not even good for the bottom line.
Yeah, we have to, we at NIM are resolutely anti-imperialist. Imperialism today is not just coming from military forces, it's coming from the very hardware and software that we use. It emanates from a lot of the power inside the mega corporation Silicon Valley. But we do believe that, the internet can release the creativity and the power of people in the global south to take control of their own lives. And open source technologies like RISC-V and like the work of NIM are more amenable to democratic and decentralized kind of control and direction. Now, unfortunately, we've ran out of time.
Yeah.
But I want to say one final thing, and I would like for you to end, Chelsea. My final thing that I would like to say is that this all seems sometimes very abstract and very technical, but ultimately, the reason why we need privacy on the internet is to have freedom, to be who we want to be, to grow how we want to grow, and to do what we want to do. And that right should fundamentally belong to everyone. With the rise of artificial intelligence and the increasing power of Silicon Valley, I think it's time for people to start organizing. You will take risks. Chelsea's obviously taken a lot already and is getting ready to take new ones.
Yeah.
But
I have a perspective of this from both sides, of being a global surveillance actor and being the other side of that. So.
But we do want you to feel confident taking that risk. I think sometimes a good example helps. So do you have any final thoughts, Chelsea?
Yeah, I love Austin. I love the weather, and I've been very cold in New York for quite some time, and I hope to be back.
So thank you so
very much.